Edward Snowden is a fucking red herring. I'm getting pretty sick and tired of things going back and forth. I've heard nothing but a bunch of bullshit back and forth from so many different media outlets, it's enough to make you sick. I don't think he's a hero. I don't think he's a villain. He's just a fucking dude. Just like you or I or anybody else. There is no difference in who this individual is from the majority of people. So, let's fucking forget about Edward Snowden just for a second here. And let's talk about something else. Let's talk about why it's important to identify Snowden as a red herring. Because ever since this story hit, ever since the media outlets started reporting the fact that someone had leaked something from the NSA's clandestine prison programs and everything else that goes along with the NSA clandestine domestic data mining operations, ever since that's hit the media, we've heard nothing about the crimes, at least in relationship to what they actually were. We've heard nothing about the information in the leak, at least in any kind of meaningful sense. No. What we have reported on is nothing but the guilt, innocence, hero, whatever. All of the paradigms that relate to Edward Snowden. But they're all bullshit because they do not mean anything. Whatever happened to Snowden is completely irrelevant. He was in Hong Kong. He's in Russia. What he has done is the most important thing here. And I'm not talking about whether he's treasonous or not. No, I'm talking about the data leaked. Because the accusations within that data leak are the pinnacle of what we should be worried about. What is one man giving away a couple things that we don't even know? We don't know what we don't know. If the NSA is not coming forward, then we don't know. We don't know how treasonous he is. We'd like to think we do. You sure as hell have heard your arguments for it. You've heard it spun one way or another. But what does it really matter? All we have left is the information. We can get Snowden. We can extradite him. He could be brought to trial for these things. But what does that change about the information? Nothing. The information remains static regardless of what happens to Edward Snowden. And that's the first thing you've got to get through your head. That I don't give a shit about Edward Snowden. I don't have an opinion yet. And you know why I don't know anything about Edward Snowden? You know why I don't have an opinion specifically on his actions? Because I don't know what the NSA is hiding. I don't know what they are admitting to. I don't know anything about the NSA side of this, which is, of course, the main article of contention. What I do think, not know, but think, is that the NSA has overstepped their boundaries in several different ways. I think they've done an affront to our liberty. I think it's clearly a breach of your Fourth Amendment rights, my Fourth Amendment rights, our Fourth Amendment rights. And I think that they're using a mudslinging campaign to scapegoat the whistleblower. If this is untrue, if everything that they've done is perfectly legal and perfectly constitutional, then what's the worry? You know, a lot of people make the argument to me, well, you've got nothing to hide. You know, if you're not doing anything wrong, you've got nothing to hide, right? Well, why would we use that argument for ourselves, yet not allow ourselves to use the same argument towards the NSA? If they're doing nothing wrong, then what do they have to hide? Now, clearly, that argument in itself is, to me, a fallacy. You can't simply say, well, what have I got to hide? You know, what have I got to lose if it's doing the greater good? Because that assumes that just because the NSA is the NSA, that they're doing the inherent right thing. And that's exactly what we're talking about. Is the NSA doing the right thing? If you want to see the mudslinging campaign and actually use it to damage Snowden's credibility, well, that's fine too. Because where's the accountability on the NSA side? If they took a high school dropout loser who's treasonous and paid him at least 100,000. I've heard different estimates, but that's irrelevant. Paid him a huge sum of money, and used a third-party contractor, and then gave him the clearance to look at your information. Doesn't that mean somebody with a bad moral fiber, an individual within an organization made up of individuals with their own morals each, doesn't that mean that that individual that you find disgusting, horrific, terrible, doesn't that mean that individual had a right to your information, a privilege to your information? Yes, it does. So where's the accountability on the NSA? Who got fired for hiring Edward Snowden? Nobody likes to ask that question. Because Edward Snowden is bullshit. We go back and forth with so many of these things, but before we can even say treason, all we have to do is look at the data. It's information that's leaked. We already know. So we want to say whistleblower. We want to say treason. Maybe they're not mutually exclusive. Maybe you can be a whistleblower and treasonous. I'm sure you could. That doesn't mean the NSA is innocent. Proving Edward Snowden guilty of anything does not make the NSA innocent. One thing we can do is hire a third party to investigate the NSA. We cannot let an internal investigation happen because that's the fox guarding the henhouse. And if they have something to hide, then they will, just as the accusations state. So, if we did something like that, and we had an investigation, for them to follow our Fourth Amendment rights, what do they have to do when they're gathering data? Well, they need a warrant. Well, they need to basically, by oath or affirmation, state, to a judge what needs to be looked for, where, who, why. And those things need to be present for each and every one of those breaches. And if they're not, then the NSA has clearly overstepped their boundaries. And if we just have one of those cases, just one overreach, we can start to see what Snowden actually means. Because if we can see just one of these abuses, then we've already proved the point. Perhaps you still think, well, if it's helpful and it's saving the country and whatever, but if it's the NSA, they should be justifying their existence. I'm sorry. Show where this overstep, if it occurred, saved somebody's life. Save the country. Do something, because without any of that, it's really just, well, we were looking for the sake of looking, and we could have. So what? Doing the right thing's not easy to do. We're not a country founded on the easiest things to do. The whole Bill of Rights is terribly inconvenient for a government. Having a government that adheres to the idea of a natural right and not breaching that is exceptionally hard for a government to do, because to stay in power, you really can't always allow all those rights all the time, unless you admit to a certain degree that you're really not always in power. So the Bill of Rights is kind of a stick in the eye to a lot of these organizations, and that's fine. That's what it's supposed to do. You're supposed to do everything within your power to maintain the natural rights, the Bill of Rights, to all the citizens of the United States, and still do your job proficiently. Again, nobody says it's supposed to be easy. But that's what makes this country great. That's what makes this country so unique. Well, it started off unique, but that's what makes us supposedly better. But where are our principles? When we allow ourselves to say, what do I have to hide? Go ahead. I don't mind. But first off, I'm not okay with that. So I really don't care what you think, because they're my individual rights. You don't get to decide, by popular vote, my individual rights. You do not have that jurisdiction over me. You cannot popularize a natural right. You cannot popularize an individual right. So I don't care if you're okay with it. I'm not okay with it. And I'm an individual. And I am the smallest minority, an individual. So, even if you said, Jeff, well, that's fine. But I still don't mind. And what do I have to hide? Going back to what we've been seeing in the media about Edward Snowden, he was a high school dropout loser, yada yada. We've heard it all. This individual had clearance to look at your records as an individual who had the moral fiber to do what he did. That's fine. Spin it any way you like. The thing is, do you think Edward Snowden's the only individual there? Absolutely not. Each individual has their own individual morality, some looser than others. In considering the hiring requirements stated by the NSA, almost anybody seems can get in. So where is our guarantee that a criminal class doesn't, in some way, infiltrate the NSA? If you really have nothing to hide, then give me somebody who actually has better qualifications than what is stated or needed to get that level of clearance in the NSA. I'm technically more trustworthy than Edward Snowden. I've never run off to Hong Kong. I graduated high school. So give me your bank account. Give me your Facebook password. Now, why wouldn't you do that? Because you don't know me. Do you know anybody at the NSA? No, you do not. The argument doesn't hold any water when you start looking at it from that perspective. So, we have to ask ourselves, what is truly the article of contention here? What are we actually debating? If we want to say that Edward Snowden's fate is an item of contention, we can. But it is separate from the crimes that may or may not have been committed by the NSA. And the only way we will know what Edward Snowden really is to know what the NSA really is. So I want you to think about that. And that's all I can ask you to do. Thank you for considering my point. Have a wonderful day.